Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Attorney General Tom Miller is here to speak about the fentanyl crisis in Iowa. He is joined by Story County Sheriff Paul Fitzgerald. Attorney General Miller will start by making some remarks, and then we'll pass it on to Sheriff Fitzgerald. After that, we'll take some questions, and then at the end, we'll wrap things up. Attorney General Miller.
Thank you. Let me just give you some background of how we got here into this terrible situation. In 1996, a while ago now, prescription opioids were prescribed in basically the right way. They were considered the pain medication of the last resort, very last resort. They were given with a lot of respect and concern about addiction. But Purdue Pharma, primarily Purdue Pharma, but others working with them, changed all that in 10 years. And by 2006, opioids, OxyContin, and the Purdue Pharma product was one of many pain medications. It was part of the toolkit, just generally not of last resort, and it wasn't given with respect for the addiction. And as a result, we had this enormous problem with addiction from prescription opioids. The AGs, myself and others have worked for 5 or 6 years to try and deal with this problem. We've sued the companies, we've negotiated, we've come to some resolutions. Some money will be flowing to Iowa and all the other states soon. A small amount has already, that can be used to try and remedy this terrible situation. And we think that the remedy, that the improvement, the change has to come in 2 areas. One is in prevention, in terms of getting the prescriptions right. And it's much better than it was, but still not where it should be. The other way to deal with this situation is by drug treatment. 2 kinds of drug treatment. The one that's best known that looks towards abstinence, but also MAT, medicine-assisted treatment, where people receive a low-grade opioid over a period of time that satisfies their cravings but doesn't give their high, allows them to live ordinary lives. But as we were working on this, all of a sudden fentanyl came along. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It's manufactured. It's not produced from a plant or a product. And fentanyl just has an enormous power and strength, much more so than OxyContin, the prescription drugs, much more so than heroin, which is also, of course, an opioid. And for a while, it was given very rarely in medical circumstances, where it was an extreme pain situation and was monitored very carefully. But what has happened in recent years is that the use of fentanyl has exploded. And because it's exploded and because it's so strong, it is just so lethal. And for a while, we saw some fentanyl pills that were extremely dangerous, and they're still around. But the current crisis really centers around something else, and that is fentanyl as an additive. What has happened is that the people that manufacture the various drugs, and they can be pills that look like prescription opioids, can be heroin, can be meth, can be cocaine, and even other drugs. What they've discovered is that of all the things that they put into these products, fentanyl is the cheapest to produce. So as a cost-cutting mechanism, these terrible manufacturers of these drugs are putting partial fentanyl into the products I mentioned, and they're extremely lethal. People don't even know that they're getting fentanyl, and oftentimes they die. And part of the reason is that the people that are getting even small amount of fentanyl have never had fentanyl before and have no immunity. So the risk of taking just about any kind of drug is very significant these days because of the fentanyl additive. Where it comes from is fentanyl is manufactured in China. For a while, the pills came from China, the pills and other products that I mentioned. And then the United States pushed back somewhat on China, and then the products, the finished product, the pill, the cocaine, is not coming from China. What happens is China ships the fentanyl to Mexico typically, and the mix is done. The deadly mix is done there. So, we have a situation that's extraordinarily dangerous, and the statistics indicate all of that. About 5 or 10 years ago, approximately 40,000 people died from drug overdoses. Today, it's over 100,000. And the increase from fentanyl is about 64,000. It's the total increase has come from these fentanyl products. So we in the AG's office are launching as best we can a multi-task force and multi-effort to deal with this situation. The most important is for people to realize the just enormous risk and not experiment with the various products, the various pills and cocaine and heroin, but oftentimes it comes in some sort of pill. Any kind of experimental use could lead to death. And also we appeal to those that are addicted, that there's no better time to get into treatment. Treatment is really the answer for people that are addicted, and both kinds of treatment, the abstinence and the MAT. For some, one kind works best. They should be in that program. For others, the other kind approach works best. They should be in that approach. So I just appeal to Iowans to not experiment with these kinds of drugs and to get into treatment if you're addicted. We also believe that since this is such a huge problem, it's going to take a multitude of solutions. And two of the solutions that we're proposing today are these, that the legislature legalize fentanyl strips. There's strips of paper that can tell people whether fentanyl is in a product or not. This is a harm reduction program, harm reduction measure that really makes sense. Recently, 2 states, Wisconsin and Georgia, a blue state and a red state, have both enacted this. This should not be a partisan issue. This is a public health issue. This is a harm reduction issue. So we think that fentanyl strips should be approved and should be used by addicts if they don't get into treatment. But remember, treatment is by far the better alternative. And then there's another aspect here that is worth considering in my view anyway. That is that we have this great relationship with the University of Iowa hospitals. Dr. Clancy and Dr. Lynch have just been working incredibly in the MAT area and with us and advising us. What Dr. Lynch said is that if she or someone tells a person who's addicted that they should use the strips, it's a message to them that someone cares about them, that their life does matter, and that's an important factor. The other thing that I'm proposing today is that greater use of naloxone and Narcan in this sense, that now people have to get it from a pharmacy, but we think that should be opened up to some nonprofits and other organizations, maybe government organizations as well, that can distribute naloxone and Narcan is the brand name. To people and obviously to addicts and their family, because this product can save people's lives. It's the antidote that people in law enforcement and public safety and emergency areas, emergency personnel can administer to people after they overdose. And literally save their life, bring their life back. So we want to have wider distribution of that in order to save lives. Again, there's no one thing that's going to solve this problem, but pieces of different solutions are going to really make a difference. So that's sort of where we're at, a little bit of how we got here. It's really a two-pronged effort on our part in the Attorney General's office. One is with prescription drugs, the original purpose to try and do prevention there and do drug treatment there. but also, it is this emergence of this fentanyl scare and series of deaths is something we and people in law enforcement, public health really want to focus on and think that it's important that we focus on it. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleague in law enforcement, Sheriff Paul Fitzgerald, the Sheriff of Story County. Paul has been a friend and an ally of our office for a long, long time. He has a brother, Mike Fitzgerald, that's a close friend of mine as well. And Paul, you've had just a remarkable career in law enforcement. You've been president of the National Association of Sheriffs, among other things. Thank you for joining me, and go ahead with your thoughts and comments on this.
Well, thank you, General Miller. First of all, I would like to thank you for taking the lead on this. This is truly a very serious crisis, not only in Story County or in Iowa, but throughout the entire nation. To give a little bit of understanding, in 2011, there was 4% of the opioid overdose deaths that had been laced with fentanyl. In 2019, we found that 51% of the overall overdose deaths have been laced with fentanyl, such as 36,000 laced with fentanyl out of 70,630 deaths. So that's, we believe, is quite serious. We had the Central Iowa Drug Task Force, which involves Story County, Boone, and Greene County. And we had a search warrant about 4 years ago, and one of our officers was exposed to fentanyl and went to the hospital. We've had people in our booking that when people were brought in, they've been exposed to fentanyl, and again, requires a trip to the hospital. This is very serious stuff, and it doesn't take much at all. In Story County, in the Central Iowa Drug Task Force, we've had 10 overdose deaths. 3 of those, we had 10 overdose cases. 3 of the 10 were overdose fatal instances. And of those 3 that were fatal, all 3 were exposed to fentanyl. So we, at Story County Sheriff's Office and Central Iowa Drug Task Force, we strongly support the effort of what you're doing here by making the fentanyl test strips legal and getting them out of being classified as drug paraphernalia. This will open things up and help save lives. We strongly believe this. This will allow the user to be able to either test the batch they have, and if fentanyl is present during that, they can at that time choose a different batch. They can use less of what they have. They can have the option to have others there when they use it, or have Narcan available. These are some of the things that we think will help save lives by the use of the fentanyl test strips. So again, Tom, we thank you very much for taking the lead on this, and your efforts are very much appreciated. And we will continue to work with the Attorney General's office and with you through whatever crisis we come across.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Sheriff Fitzgerald, for all your support and all your public service. I'll just make two more points before we throw it open to questions. One is that, of course, a prosecution is part of the solution here. It's part of the many steps that we need to take to deal with this issue, and certainly want to recognize the importance of prosecution. The other is I have some more recent statistics from 2021. There were 258 deaths in Iowa from opioids. 83, that was a 21% increase from the year before, and 83% were fentanyl related. So fentanyl has just taken over as the death method of overdoses. So with that, glad to take any questions anybody has.
Thank you, AG Miller, and thank you, Sheriff Fitzgerald. We'll now take questions. If you would like to send a question, you can do so in the chat box or use the raise hand function. Okay, our first question comes from Caleb. Oh.
Yeah. Hey, Attorney General Miller, I just wanted to clarify, as far as fentanyl test strips go, so right now they're classified as paraphernalia. So I guess what would be the situation? I guess how is that treated if somebody, is, I don't know if it's in their possession when they're arrested or something like that? How is that classified, and what would change if they were legalized?
Yeah, it's considered drug paraphernalia at this point, fentanyl strips, that is, and is a violation of the law, of the criminal law as a result. The legislation would change that and remove that from the definition of drug paraphernalia and make it impossible to prosecute for possession.
Okay, our next question comes from Ian Richardson.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, Attorney General Miller. Quick question. You mentioned that, this should be a bipartisan issue. Just curious about what discussions you've had with lawmakers about this legislation and your thoughts on the chances that this could pass next session. Thanks.
Yeah, I had just a few preliminary discussions with some key legislators during the last session, and got a sort of a mixed reaction, or at least an openness. So it's something we'll explore as we go out the rest of the year and into next year. But I'm hoping that it can be bipartisan, because it's basic harm reduction, and that's an important public health principle that we rely on. We noticed that Georgia recently enacted this change, so hopefully it's not partisan. And to this point, dealing with this terrible set of issues concerning prescription opioids and fentanyl, it hasn't been a partisan issue in Iowa, and in a way, and I like to brag on the attorney generals. I'm proud of our group of attorney generals. It's totally a bipartisan issue among attorney generals. We've had this task force and done this investigation, filed lawsuits, and we have all 50 states involved. And the leadership is split between Democrats and Republicans. So hopefully Iowa can take a lesson from the attorney generals and make this a nonpartisan issue.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions if anyone would like to submit them.
Paul, we haven't been this clear that there's no questions about what we've done. I take it, Tom, you covered it very well. It's very true on all points.
Okay, with that, if there are no other questions, we will wrap it up. We will be sending a press release following the conclusion of the press conference. And if you would like a copy of the press conference video, please send an email to myself, ashley.keeler@ag.iowa.gov. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and Ashley, I'd just say thank you to the people that joined. We had 47 participants from the press and people in public health and people in government. Thank you for everybody that listened to Sheriff Fitzgerald and myself.